Hi, and welcome to today's Oxford Said episode of Leadership in Extraordinary Times. I'm Professor Andrew Stephen, the L'Oreal Professor of Marketing and the Associate Dean of Research here at Oxford Said. And I want to welcome you to our fifth week, or the end of our fifth week of broadcasting. We've basically been going for a month now. So I want to thank you all for joining us. And if you're new, thank you for joining us in the future. Because we've really had a number of amazing, really interesting conversations, and this will keep on going, certainly into May and June. But I just wanted to remind you, if you haven't seen some of the previous broadcasts, you can certainly visit our website under Oxford Answers, and you can catch all the videos of previous episodes there and all the different topics from the very beginning with Peter Tufano and Paul Kollman all the way through to the episode earlier this week. And speaking of what's coming next, we have a special episode tomorrow afternoon in the UK, our Climate Action Summit with keynote speaker, former Vice President of the United States, Al Gore, is going to be joining us, talk about climate action. And that's going to be at the special time of 3 p.m. British summer time. So please join us tomorrow for that, which I'm sure will be really, really exciting. And then also next week, just a little preview of what's coming up next week. On Tuesday and Thursday in our regular time slots at 2 o'clock UK time, I'll be hosting Tuesday's episode on misinformation, media, and trust, which is very pertinent as always, but pertinent now during this crisis. And I'll be joined by Professor Phil Howard, who's an expert on digital misinformation from the Oxford Internet Institute here at the University of Oxford. And then two colleagues from Oxford Said, Fellows in Management Practice, Alex Connock and Rachel Botsman, with expertise in media and trust, respectively. And then on Thursday, Dean Peter Tufano is going to be back in conversation with author Jacqueline Novogratz, who will talk about her new book, Manifesto for a Moral Revolution. So that's what's coming up next week. So hopefully you can join us then. But now I want to move on to today's episode, which is about marketing and advertising through and beyond COVID-19. And I've set this up in conjunction with our Oxford Future of Marketing initiative, which I also direct. And three of our very good friends of the Future of Marketing initiative and the school, who are excellent marketing leaders with a lot of insights, are joining us today. So I'm very, very happy to welcome Martyn Etherington, who is the Chief Marketing Officer of Teradata, which is a global enterprise technology company specializing in data and analytics. Julie Kollman, who is the Global Head of Insights for Moet Hennessy, which is obviously part of the LVMH group, and is probably responsible for bringing a number of brands that you're enjoying at home during lockdown, such as Moet and Veuve Clicquot and Glenmorangie. And Seth Rogin, who's an associate fellow at the school and also the CEO of Magnolia Media Partners. And prior to that, was the CEO of Nucleus Marketing. And before that, on the publisher side at the New York Times and Mashable. So Martyn, Julie, and Seth, it's great to see you all. I should mention that we're different parts of the world here. So Julie and I are broadcasting from our homes outside of London, but Seth is in New York and Martyn is in San Diego. And it's a very early part of the day in San Diego. So thank you, Martyn, for getting up for us. So I want to kind of get right into it, because what we're going to talk about is not only kind of what's happening in marketing and advertising at the moment, and what leaders need to be thinking about as we sort of weather this crisis, but thinking about recovery, thinking about the longer term perspective, because I think, quite frankly, we've been in this crisis for some time now, but we also do need to start thinking about what's next, and what that looks like and what we need to do to prepare. So that's broadly what we're going to talk about today. I also want to encourage our audience to please leave us your questions. At various points throughout the broadcast, we'll take a look at what you're asking us, and I'll field those questions to our panelists. But let's start with now. So last night, actually, I was thumbing through my Twitter feed, and I saw a tweet from Mark Reed, the CEO of WPP, who we all know. And he said, and I'm going to quote this, shopping, paying cash, business meetings, art auctions, exercise classes, doctor's consultations, school lessons, They're all moving online. It's hard to think of an activity that is not, all of which means a lot of innovation ahead of us. I think pretty insightful words, and I think it's something we've all been thinking about. Julie, let's come to you first, and I'm curious what your reaction is and what you're seeing sort of in consumer markets with respect to these changes we've gone through.
Well, I think the one thing that Martyn missed out, which is obviously important to us, is the degree to which socializing has had to move online. And who would have thought that we would all be getting together at 6 o'clock to have a drink together on Zoom? Who would have thought my grandmother would know how to use Zoom? The only way that we've been able to keep in touch during lockdown is through technology and through digital means. And that's something that's completely new for most consumers, for literally for most consumers. I know we live in a bubble where we think it's normal, but for a lot of consumers, living their life online is absolutely not normal. And I think what's important, we all know that we're now shopping more online. We know we're going to the doctor, we're doing our lessons, etc. I think what's important to think about in terms of how will this affect behavior in the future is what are the benefits people are getting from this new digital life, their new life online. And there are so many of them. It's more convenient, it saves time, they have access to things that they wouldn't normally have access to. They can get in touch with people they normally wouldn't be able to see. There are so many benefits that I think that this really does represent a fundamental transformation of how we live our lives, how we're going to live our lives in the future.
I think thinking about in terms of that sort of, it's that value equation in terms of benefits is actually really interesting. If I think about, well, do I get more value out of doing it now, how I'm doing it versus how I used to do it? That probably is going to influence how people think. Maybe not as sort of explicitly, but at some level, think as they return to whatever consumer life becomes after all of this, and we'll get to that in more concrete terms. But first, Martyn, how about on the sort of the business to business and enterprise side of things? What are you seeing that's changed?
I would say I concur with the statement, but I would say a sort of contrarian but. I think there will be a but which says, I want to get back to the physical side of things. And I think there will be a tremendous, the back end of the year, people wanting to go out and actually have the physical interaction again. And certainly hearing from my teams that they love the working from home part, but they are missing that human interaction, that human engagement. So I would concur, all of those good things, we've changed the way I'm working. I've even changed the way that I think about working from home. I must admit, I wasn't a huge proponent, having done it before, and I've been probably a big advocate of bringing more people into the office when I first joined. But I think I've actually even changed my point of view about the effectiveness of how people are starting to work from home, and the productivity is just huge. So this afternoon, I'm going down to Sao Paulo and also to Chicago in one day. So I mean, it's just different ways of working. I think we'll adapt to that, but I think there will be a slingshot approach the end of the year, and people will want to get back together again.
And just to follow up on that, though, with respect to Teradata specifically, and companies like Teradata, where your customers are, some of the biggest companies on the planet, how has this been changing the nature of those relationships and those interactions with your big customers? Because it's different to just us, as consumers going and buying more stuff on Amazon, obviously. So that personal aspect that's normally very important in relationships at that level is different now. So can you sort of tell us a little bit more how that's playing out?
Yeah, and particularly for us, where we have a lot of, most of our deal sizes are in the tens of millions of dollars. This is not an add to shopping cart, although it would be great if it was. So it's a very, very consultative-led selling. So we've actually transitioned everything we've done physically to virtually. And we've done that really in the last 3 weeks. So we had something called Answers the World Tour, and it's really a hands-on experience using Vantage, our flagship data analytics platform, to taking that to virtual. So we've now used digital technologies, and we're now bringing that to market in May. So whereas before we could touch hundreds of people, we can now touch thousands of people. We've now got an executive briefing center, which is just a tremendous experience for our customers to come in and experience what we can do to help solve their most critical data and analytics problems. We've now taken that online. We've already got 9 major brands signed up to attend these in the last 2 weeks virtually. So we've just transitioned very, very quickly to get into that virtual world. And also what we're doing is changing the way that we think about communicating content. So we've turned into we've got now a publisher's mindset with content. And now we're becoming broadcasters. I mean, this is a great example of we're becoming broadcasters ourselves. And that's what we're doing here at Teradata, to make sure we can convey the content to the right people, the right time, with the right message, but do so now with a different medium.
So it's a good segue actually to you, Seth. So speaking of publishers, speaking of broadcasters, media as an industry, what are you hearing with respect to what's going on now in those businesses where, in essence, every company is now inundating us with broadcasts, but there's also a lot more time spent maybe watching traditional broadcasts as well as other sources of media. So what's your take on this at that moment?
Right. I think as consumers right now, if we're not guzzling Julie's products, we're guzzling media products right now. No offense, Julie. I know I'm doing my share on both. And I think, the important thing is that in some ways, the media business was built for this ahead of time. When I read Mark's tweet as saying that everything is going virtual, it led me to ask the question, is this the dawning of the age of agoraphobia, right? Are we really about to be this locked inside culture? And I don't think we are. And I think as marketers, we're very good at telling ourselves stories, which is always leads off with whatever we're doing right now is about to be extremely correct for the infinite future. And I don't think that's necessarily so. I think to Julie's point, where there is value for the consumer, and whether that's a B2B consumer or an actual B2C consumer, those things will become more virtual. But there are certain things, let's be clear, that matter about in-human contact. And some of what Mark brought up about being a cashless society has real impacts for the poor. It has real impacts for supply chains. And it has real impacts as marketers and as media companies for the kinds of talent we're looking for moving forward. If you were hiring, and I, of course, come from a news and journalism background, as you were saying before, Andrew, if you were hiring a journalist 30 years ago, you were probably hiring for somebody who had this great network and would pound the street all day and write you a couple of paragraphs and get that in on time. And now that journalist has to be someone who is a videographer with their own phone, can edit video on the fly, can back that up with B-roll and audio, get all of that in so that we can consume it, because we are voraciously hungry for content right now. And I think we're seeing that from brands as well, because if you read the results of some of the big public companies on the platform side of the last 48 hours, they're saying they saw a blip and then advertisers have really come back in a big way.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so just looking at the question here, so which is sort of a good connection to what I want to get to next, which is actually what actions are brands taking in response to this crisis? And the question is basically about cutting budgets. I'm sure you're going to say it's not a good idea to do that, but why? Shouldn't, in a time when employees unfortunately being either furloughed or laid off, unemployment is on the rise, should brands still be spending on marketing and particularly advertising activity, or is there something else they should be putting those resources into? Julie, let's go to you first. I'm curious to hear what all three of you think about this.
Well, I think it's a qualified yes. They should still invest in their brands for a couple of different reasons. One is that we know from the WPP's Brand Z work that through the 2008 crisis, strong brands recovered 9 times faster than brands that didn't have strong equity. And so, if you're a company that's beholden to your shareholders to deliver a return on the business, and frankly, if you want to have enough cash to keep running your business, you have a duty to keep your brand strong. Now, having said that, do you put everything into advertising? No. There are lots of things you need to do to keep your brand strong, which includes, in a crisis like this, consumers absolutely expect companies to behave responsibly. They expect companies to, number one, in all of the surveys I've read, and there are a lot of them out there, number one, protect your employees. Number two, give back to communities that are being hurt by this crisis. Number three, don't sell to me and don't take advantage of the situation. But number four, keep communicating. And so I think companies do need to continue to invest in their brands. I do think, and if we think about the actions you take today are going to have consequences for 3 or 4 years. So if you completely cut off advertising for your brand now and damage your equity, reduce your salience and reduce your relevance, you're going to spend 3 or 4 years trying to get that back. And that's going to involve a level of investment next year that you're not going to be able to support. So companies really need to think carefully about the degree to which they cut now and what the implications will be for the future.
I mean, you mentioned the brand Z. I mean, we did a future-proof podcast episode with Kantar about a week or so ago, where they were talking about, they were sort of simulating out the effects of advertising budget cuts on brand equity. And basically, if you cut it all, you're going to take a sort of a double-digit hit to brand equity. But if you cut only, say, half, then, which is still pretty significant budget cut, you're only going to take a single-digit cut or hit rather to brand equity, and therefore recovery is going to be faster, or at least the opportunity to recover is faster. So I think there's good evidence to suggest that in times of crisis, don't turn the lights off for lots of reasons. Martyn, what's your take on this from sort of the enterprise perspective, where marketing is more complex in some sense as well?
Yeah, there are two aspects of our business. You've got the industries such as travel, hospitality, and many other industries where the markets have literally just gone away. 30, 40, 50, even 70% of the market's just gone away. And they're hurting. So we've got to show up, and we've got to make sure that we stand by those customers during that time. And I think also there's other parts of our business that are just growing. And we've also make sure we're there for them too. So I think from our customers' perspective, we've got to be very, very thoughtful about how we reprioritize our segments and our targeting, number one. Number two is, I absolutely concur, particularly publicly traded companies such as Teradata have to deliver shareholder value. Now, there's going to be impact to our business. It's really, how do we dynamically resource allocate? So for us, we've really literally shut down all of our physical events the rest of the year. And we're dynamically resource allocating the dollars for that to really move forward for virtual, digital. And then we're actually going to thinking about opening up advertising again, probably mid to late August or summer, because we believe that there's actually the right thing to do. And then also, I think there's going to be deals to be had. We may be advertising in places where we could never afford. So I think that's got to be top of mind. But you do so in making sure that you do so with the brand authenticity. And I think during this time, I love Warren Buffett's phrase, which he says, you will be discovered when the tide, you'll discover who's been skinny dipping when the tide goes out. And I think for brands, people will be judged upon the way that they show up. Absolutely. And the way that they act during this crisis. And I think it's for us as a brand, particularly ours, is about transforming the way the businesses work and people live through the power of data. We are absolutely focused on being socially responsible and being there for our customers and doing things for our customers that we wouldn't normally do in a normal time. But I believe that those brands who can do that authentically will be rewarded as we move forward.
I think Martyn, can I just add in? I think Martyn's making a good point that applies to consumers as well, because not every consumer is experiencing this crisis in the same way. I mean, we have a stark example within the Moet Hennessy business of, we have consumers who are ultra high net worth individuals and are willing to spend thousands of dollars on a bottle of cognac, for example. And we have consumers who are normal, everyday Americans who, many of whom have lost their jobs. And so how we respond to those, they're having a completely different experience of this pandemic, and how we respond and communicate with them, we have to be really careful in everything we say and do, because we have two very different audiences.
And those
And so-
audiences are particularly sensitive, right? I mean, there's a very fine line that's there. I think Martyn tapped into it exactly, which is that the message has to be authentic.
Yeah.
That it isn't just, right, Julie, we know we're in a moment of crisis and we want to sell a product, and I know that's certainly not the way any of us would go about it. And I feel like there's this perilous distance, which is the line between opportunity and opportunism, that is probably in an inverse proportion to the size of the crisis, right? So the deeper the crisis, the thinner that razor's edge becomes, because we've all seen campaigns right now, and we can see people doing it wrong right now, saying, if you buy this product, we will donate something. And there is inevitably a social media backlash that says, why wouldn't you donate already?
Yeah.
Right? Why wouldn't you actually step up? You don't need my $3 to step up and do that. And so I think we have learned, because unfortunately we've been in a period of the last 20 years of building crises that have led us to this point, and hopefully to be wiser about it. But there are still brands doing it so wrong today that we all wince when we see it. And the ones that are authentic, I think, will truly win.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
So Seth, I want to come to you though, because you said there have been other crisis moments where all sorts of industries, including our industries, have had to adapt. But you were at the New York Times in the advertising business during 9/11 and rebuilding after that. So
I know that seems impossible because I look 15, but yes.
Yes, that youthful appearance. But I'm sure there are lessons that we can learn. I mean, that's one example of a past crisis. But what happened then in terms of the advertising business?
The time after 9/11, unfortunately, has to be in the midst of the deep grief. And by the way, I'm talking to you right now from my home, 1 block away from World Trade. I've been a New Yorker and a Manhattanite I'm a New Yorker my entire life, a Manhattanite for as long as I can stand on my own. And literally, if I took you outside the window, you would see the new World Trade Tower right now, 1 block away. And having lived through that and been at the New York Times through anthrax attacks and the like, we were all extremely sensitive, obviously, after that moment, as anyone would be. And yet the worst ads and marketing campaigns came out after that time because people didn't understand how to do this. And I remember being at the Times, and we had an ad that ran only 2 or 3 days after the attack that said something from a furniture store, something like, we mourn the over 2,000 dead, and dinette sets are $6.99 this week. And they were not the only one. There was a famous ad from a Belgian humor magazine that said their magazine was so distracting that if pilots were reading it, they would have crashed into the towers that ran. And you can see all these ads online right now if you look that up. And then there was, of course, the most infamous one, which was tying the tsunami, the Indian Ocean tsunami, to 9/11 from the World Wildlife Fund, that just had the greatest of intentions, but the worst of creative. And I won't name the agency, they were well maligned for it. They're a global agency, saying that if more planes had flown into the trade towers, it would be close to the loss of the tsunami. Comparing crises, comparing these things always fails. Asking people to step up to do what you want yourself to do, meaning to give charitably, always fails. Stopping and saying, though, and I think there's a great example out there of someone doing it right now, Andrew, which is the ads that are running, I believe, globally from Frito-Lay, where they're actually stopping and saying, we're not going to show our logo, we're not going to show our product. We just wanted you to know we're stepping up and giving back. And here are 5 charitable efforts that we are doing. Thank you. And their logo runs for maybe a second at the end of the TV spot or the digital video spot, and that's it. And I think the more brands that act that way, bravo to them. Those are the ones that we're going to remember. And we always remember the best and the worst. Unfortunately, we usually remember the worst, as I just did, more than anything else. But we can remember the great campaigns that came out of times of crisis, like the Red campaign during the times of the worst of the HIV crisis. There are ways to do this right. And I think learning from our history, plus matching with the technology of new platforms, is the calculus for success.
So and I think the new platforms, which you mentioned, is important because that also allows companies to respond much more quickly. We're much more agile today than we were 10 years ago or 20 years ago. And consumers have a massive expectation of the speed of response, not just the authenticity of the response. which is quite interesting. I also think that companies are much better positioned to respond more appropriately today than we were 10 years ago, simply because the idea of corporate social responsibility has become so important and so ingrained in most large companies that they actually have people with the sensitivity and the understanding of what kinds of responses can actually have the greatest impact, and what kinds of responses are most closely linked to the brand or company DNA. So I think we're better positioned to respond appropriately today than we have been.
So I want to come back to, it's actually a question that we got from Ben in our audience, but also kind of what you were talking about, Martyn, around dynamic resource reallocation, really, or allocation. I mean, Ben has asked, will the current situation refocus our attention to marketing automation and digital/data transformation? I'm sure we've all seen the joke going around, sort of multiple choice question. Who's leading the digital transformation of your organization? A, the CEO, B, the CMO, C, the CTO, D, COVID-19. So I think, yes, there's digital transformation may be accelerated, but in what ways is it smart? And maybe this is getting us towards thinking a bit more about what's next as well and beyond the crisis. Maybe, Martyn, if you want to kick off, your thoughts around digital transformation. It's a complex but good question.
Yeah, and I think there's great cartoons also too from the great Tom Fishburne too. I think, I mean, look, if you weren't making the digital transformation already, then you're going to be found out. I think so. We started from a marketing perspective on that journey before I joined Teradata 2 years ago. And we've just really accelerated that these past 2 years. And that's about making sure we provide the best digital experience for our customers, period. We want to be the center of gravity for everything, all data and analytics. So I think we began that journey. I think brands have been on the journey of being digitally branded very, very long ago. And the one thing that this has really accelerated the gaps internally is digital competence. Really, there's no difference now between digital marketing. It really is just marketing. And I think this is going to accelerate our doubling down and investing on digitally competent teams. And we're already kicked that off. We're hiring for about 8 or 10 people now in the digital area to accelerate our move to digital from a marketing perspective. And we're embarking upon internal training of our existing employees, sharpening their skills. So I think this has really heightened and accelerated the appetite for change. And certainly for us, it's really just convinced us to really accelerate and put our foot down on the accelerator and really take the investments we were doing in physical and putting them into the digital space.
Yeah, it's not dissimilar to the point you're making about sort of views on working from home changing, team structures. Yeah. But the other point I'd add is actually in seeing this at say business school as well with our teams is we've been forced to become more agile around digital and using that for broadcasts such as this and all sorts of forms of digital content and marketing. I think it's actually people are having to kind of learn skills and update their skills maybe on the fly. But it's also, I think, giving people some confidence to realize, oh, okay, we can do this stuff. And maybe it's not perfect to begin with, but we'll learn and we'll get there. And it's been this sort of positive impetus for change. So I think a big part of that sort of accelerated transformation is in part giving people. I mean, sometimes you need a reason to go and try something new and different, and this has certainly given that reason. And you see people actually gaining a lot of confidence in new skills that they're acquiring. So I think that's a positive. And then the question is, how do you then take that and extend it even further beyond? So let's talk about beyond. And I don't know about the rest of you and certainly those of you out there watching now, but I find, myself in meetings with colleagues and, we're talking about, oh, well, when this is over or when we go back to normal, and then someone sort of nervously chuckles, oh, you mean the new normal? And then no one really knows what we're talking about. And we don't obviously have a crystal ball, but it would make sense for us to think of the context of marketing. what this new normal is potentially going to look like, or maybe more practically speaking, what marketers need to be thinking about as we advance into that new normal, so that we see it and can adapt accordingly. So Seth, maybe you'd like to start.
Sure. In terms of what marketers are going to be thinking about as we come out, I mean, I think there's a moment here of, as I was talking before about the line between opportunity and opportunism, there is a moment of great opportunity here, both from the crisis that we're all facing and the innovation that we're seeing, but also the financial crisis that is ensuing around it and seems to be fluctuating day by day. If you look back at the financial crises of generations before, that has been the point of genesis for some of the greatest brands. And it's been those brands that have doubled down during that time authentically on what they are, what they stood for, and just delivered quality at a valuable price. If you look back, I mean, GE started during the financial panic of 1873. Disney started just before the Great Depression, as did the New Yorker magazine. HP, Hewlett Packard, started before the Depression. Microsoft started during the downturn in 1975, and on and on. But then you also see great legitimate brands that had already existed that used the moment to actually be of service to their customers and build their business. So if you look at something like Kellogg during the moment of the Great Depression, they were by far a secondary brand, but they wound up investing more and lowering their prices by saying to the consumer, we want to be more on your radar. We want to advertise a bit more, but we're also going to reduce our price because we know you're going through a tough time. And in doing that, they demonstrated a genuineness of spirit and of listening to the consumer. And I think if there's any lesson during this time, it's that we don't yet have the answers, but that they will come from listening to these consumers. And it's why Julie, as a head of insight, is in this amazing role right now, not only because she has a product that's in high demand, but also because that demand is evolving with our state of being consumers, how much we leave our homes, how much we want to order in versus going out, how much our ability is to buy that product, as she was saying. And so I actually see this, while we, of course, have to digest the challenge of it, there is a real business opportunity here for the people who do it right.
So Julie, I think we have to come to you next, since Seth teed it up. But but what I mean, in your industry, what do you, from an insights perspective into consumers? I mean, is it too early to be charting out what that new normal might look like in terms of drinks, occasions, and so on, or what are you working on at the moment with respect to that?
I don't think, if any insights person tells you they can predict the future, then you probably shouldn't hire them, in my view. And so we don't talk about being able to say, this is what the new normal is going to be. We don't try to tell, I'm not trying to tell the business that I know exactly what's going to happen in the future. The one thing, in fact, I just completed about an hour ago, my kind of overall summary of everything that we're seeing and where I think that's going to, what direction does that look like it's going to go, and therefore what are the implications for Moet Hennessy? And I think, and my conclusion from all of that is that actually what this crisis has done is it has simply accelerated the pace of trends we've been seeing for 5 years. More and more things have been moving online. It's just now, it all went in 6 weeks instead of another 3 years. The sustainability, I mean, the one big trend I think that's had a massive thruster put under it is people's attention to climate change and sustainability and environmental issues, because people in cities who can now breathe the air because we're not driving everywhere and there aren't 5 billion planes flying over every day, are suddenly realizing, oh my goodness, maybe human activity does contribute to climate change and maybe we can do something about it. And so I think sustainability, particularly around climate change, but I also think around waste and packaging and local and the desire for more locally produced products and support for local businesses is going to be probably the biggest outcome of this whole event of anything. And I think a third big trend is in this area of the broader area of trust. Consumers are going to have a hard time for the next 6 months trusting strangers in a crowded situation, trusting businesses restaurants and supermarkets, et cetera, to be as sanitary and hygienic. trusting food company or food products that are being imported from countries that had a worse outbreak than their country did. I think trust is going to become a much more sensitive topic over the next 6 to 9 months. And I think, and to Seth's point, though, this is the opportunity for a company to step up and build its credentials and build its trust with its consumer base, and they will be able to reap the benefits of that for a long time moving forward.
So let's talk about actually the concept of or what the action of green recovery, because a number of questions have sort of been talking about this in one way or another around purpose, sustainability, responsibility, and you brought it up and it's come up a couple of times already. And so we know that earlier this month there was the launch of the European Alliance for Green Recovery, with lots and lots of companies joining that. I don't know if there's something similar in the United States, although maybe Seth or Martyn could enlighten me. But I also think at the same time that a lot of that momentum we had around particularly climate, but the broader sense of corporate purpose and multiple stakeholders and all of those themes, which, as you all know, are very important to us at Said. We had a lot of momentum, and now this has come and been a distraction. So the spirit of the idea of a green recovery is excellent, but how do we make sure that happens? And I do mean it in sort of in practical terms. I mean, Julie sort of talked about things like packaging and supporting local businesses and so on. I'm kind of curious what else we might need to be thinking about, say, from the marketing and the customer side with that. So Martyn, do you have some thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do. And I think Julie uses the word trust. And I think we're already in the post-trust era coming into this with the fake news, etc. And you're even doing a session, Andrew, based upon that. I think right now, I think people are recognizing there's distrust with some of the media outlets. So I think trust is going to be a real critical part of this. And I think for us, and I go back to this word authenticity. Those brands that are authentic and compassionate throughout this are the ones that are going to shine. And I think there are other things that are going on, not just on the climate side. So for instance, 100 or so companies in the US have formed something called the Covid-19 Healthcare Coalition. And that's really helping people solve this problem with technology innovation. For us, we're giving up data scientists and our technology platforms, and we're doing so with our competition. And this has actually brought the industry together to do good versus looking good. And I think this really notion of being authentic to your brand, but doing so for the betterment of mankind, it sounds very lofty and a little bit sort of kumbaya, but I'm seeing this and just the human spirit rallying around, and I've seen the collaboration some with our competitors I've never seen before. And I think this is the time that the brands will be measured upon what they do versus what they say, and not putting big brands up on NASDAQ saying we're in it with you. Those hollow weasel words. It's really the authenticity, and how do you win back trust in this post-trust era?
So we talk about authentic action to win back that trust. How I want to, but Seth, I mean, you always have great quotes, and one of them that you used before was, there's a fine line between opportunistic and opportunity, if I'm quoting you correctly. So how do we take that action that Martyn's talking about, sort of that authentic pro-social action, instead of just saying we're here with you, but rather we're doing something good? And actually, Julie, your parent company, for example, in terms of LVMH shifting production to hand sanitizer, and L'Oreal and others have done that as well. Yeah. But how do you tell people so that you sort of get credit for that without going overboard and looking like we're just saying, oh, look, aren't we wonderful? How do you do it, Seth?
I think you just did it, right? It's that people who act with, and I think are earning, to Julie's great word, the credentials of trust, are seeing those messages go out in more than the normal standard ways of paid marketing. They're coming out in social. They're coming out in terms of news coverage, where the news is looking for the bright lights because there's only so much grimness they can portray and keep people without getting fully morose while they're watching. And so companies that are canning water instead of beer, and companies that are providing sanitizer and the like, I think are doing exactly the right thing. I'm very proud of an organization I was on the board of for many years called the Ad Council here in the US that immediately stepped into action within about 48 hours after the announcement, working with the White House to actually get out information to say, here's what shelter in place means. Here's what it means to protect yourself, to wash your hands and the like, and to donate millions upon millions of dollars of media, as I know is happening in organizations that are similar around the world. I think that's where it's very important. To Martyn's point about a green recovery, I don't know of a similar organization in the US, but I will say I think probably what we need here, rather than only a green recovery, is a recovery that stops the anti-intellectualism that has stopped our country from growing for a while, where people don't necessarily want to know what's true, or they want to decide what's fake news and what isn't. You have people being told by the most senior powers that they should drink cleaners, and therefore they're worried about what is true and what isn't and who they can trust. And in some ways, it's coming out that they can trust these brands more than they can trust their own elected leadership. And what a strange time to be in, when the brands are commercial entities and are being paid to persuade them. And so I think there's a very unusual moment happening, not just in the US, but around the world, which is to reorganize who we trust, and to get a sense of where our priorities are as a society. Crises reveal the weaknesses and strengths within societies, but also within businesses. And I think we've revealed in the media side a great strength, which is we're already connected to people within their homes. We're already connected in terms of the way that we deliver the marketing, we deliver the journalism to people within their homes or on their devices, wherever they are around the world. Now, how do we work together with brands to make sure that that message is being conveyed? And I want to see it happen not just on the legacy properties, but on the new properties. What's being done to tell the viewers of TikTok that they need to be washing their hands? And there are campaigns doing it, right? There was one that came out of Korea that was brilliant. So how do we challenge ourselves as marketers, as storytellers, to use the newest technology to do that? Also keeping in mind that not all of our data is as valuable today as it was yesterday, since our behaviors are changing as we go.
But I think trust goes beyond just doing good during the crisis. I think that's absolutely what has to happen today, so that you don't completely lose trust. But I think in terms of the recovery, we need to keep trust foremost in our mind. And trust comes from the consumer, your consumer feeling like you really understand what they want and you're honestly trying to do your best to deliver to them. Trust means not giving them a product that's not safe or not good or not worth the money you're charging for it. Trust means lots of different things besides just saying we're going to donate some stuff during the crisis. And I hope that companies will continue to think about why they did what they did during the crisis and extend that thinking into the future, because that's how you're going to create the strongest relationship and strongest bond with your consumers.
And I think what we're getting into here is, in thinking about beyond all of this, is in some sense shifting of strategies and tactics. But there's been quite a lot of questions that I've been monitoring here in the Q&A coming in, really about what marketing strategies should look like. And I mean, even we all had a conversation with all of our other future of marketing partners, a few weeks ago, privately, where basically people are saying, yeah, we're reevaluating our strategies. We're going back to that planning process and not just little tweaks. And there's a question here which I'll read out, but I think it's perhaps broader. But this one comes from Dots Without Diameter on Twitter. Hello. But they're saying, and this relates to retail actually. So luxury sectors, e-commerce has boomed, and ad dollars have been going online, but brands have also invested deeply in bricks and mortar boutiques to make them sort of destinations or temples for their brands. And obviously that's now maybe a strategy that should be brought into question. But if we think about retail, we think about what we've also been saying. I mean, trust is something we've been talking about, but another thing that marketers have liked to talk a lot about in the last few years has been experiences. That it changes the nature of an experience, and that's just sort of one sort of area in which strategies might need to be reevaluated. But what are you seeing either in your organizations or with partners and customers around rethinking your marketing strategies? And is this what we all need to be doing? Do we all need to kind of go back and say, let's take a look at this again? What are our assumptions now going to be? or is that maybe too much of a knee-jerk reaction? Julie, maybe we'll start with you.
I would say I don't. I mean, obviously, when you talk about building temples to your brands, LVMH certainly has invested quite heavily in that, and actually, MH was starting to invest in that as well. And I think, let me answer that question, and then I'll get to the marketing strategy one. I think for the last 2 or 3 years at least, the nature of bricks and mortar retail had already started to evolve, particularly at the more premium levels, in that there was less expectation that sales were going to be driven in the bricks and mortar outlet. The bricks and mortar outlet was there to bring the brand to life, to bring the brand's values to life, to get people immersed in the experience, and for prestige and to drive salience and all of those things, and recognizing that often the transaction would often take place somewhere else, and that's fine. And I think so. In terms of your bricks and mortar strategy, I think you do need to adjust more towards how can you use that to bring your brand more to life and immerse the consumer in your world, as opposed to thinking that's where all your transactions are going to take place. In terms of overall strategy, I don't necessarily know. If you define marketing strategy as the consumer behavior you're trying to change, and in order to get to a financial outcome, I don't necessarily think there's only 3 or 4 behaviors, ultimate consumption behaviors, that can change, and the financial outcomes don't change. So I don't think your strategy changes. I think how you're going to deliver your strategy probably does need to be rethought in this new environment. Just because I think, as Seth says, there are more opportunities now. There are different ways to take advantage of this opportunity, and if you haven't thought through them, you're not going to take advantage of them.
Martyn?
That's actually interesting, and that prompted me just to think about the word I'd use. I'd say we're moving into a hybrid world. And I think to the tweet that came in asking that question, I'll give an example of how we're actually investing in bricks and mortar. 2 weeks ago, we secured significant funding to update our executive briefing center in San Diego, in London, in Tokyo. And we know, and there was pressure, and there was like, is this a good investment of our time when people are going to digital and physical? And the resounding support I got from our chief revenue officer, our chief financial officer, was absolutely. Because it will be about the experience, and this will be longer than the next 3, 6, 9 months. This is a bet we're placing for the next 2-3 years. So I believe we will recover, and we'll recover in a hybrid world. And they'll have to be finding the balance between digital, virtual, physical, and experience. And I think the brands that go too far one way will overcompensate. So it was a fair question, and it would be so easy for us to saying, cut that budget, ain't going to do it. We're going to deploy that elsewhere. But business is a long game, particularly if you're a publicly traded company. It's for the long game. And I think it's having the intestinal fortitude and the vision and the courage to keep with those investments by also then rebalancing your portfolio to accommodate what's going on in the world as well.
And so there's another question I want to come to, sort of maybe taking a step into the media landscape, though, where I think we are maybe seeing media consumption differences. And so, Seth, this is for you. So it's from Tobias, who's here in the UK and is a 6th form student. So I guess we're attracting even younger potential students for Oxford. That's awesome. So Tobias is asking, would you argue that social media advertising is more important and reaches a greater audience now than it did before COVID-19? Seth?
No, I think it was already compelling beforehand. I think social media, first of all, is changing in its definition, right? If social media in the past was Facebook, and Facebook, according to their numbers that I believe they announced yesterday or the day before, they said that they saw some blip, but that it's coming back. They didn't say if it was the same advertisers who had left them that are now returning, but that the volume of advertising seems to be returning ongoing into the second quarter. So that's interesting to see. It shows that the blip for the social media business was pretty minor, if you believe what they're saying. And the similar story came out of Google as well. And if you look at any of the sort of FANG stocks that are connected to media, you're seeing a similar trend. What in terms of social media becoming more dominant, I think it's that the platforms are changing more quickly. And so that's why you see something like a TikTok, which is now much more important and growing in global scale. But I would actually say that this is not a moment of change for social media. This is a moment of change for media, period, that will be seen as a turning point. And I think this is the legitimizing moment for OTT, for over-the-top television, for direct delivered video to the home, because it is gaining massive scale from the amount of streaming that's happening. That may also have a social impact because we all chat about what we're streaming, and those two may be well connected. And of course, there are great data platforms that do that. But I think OTT is becoming the legitimized force of media in many ways during this time. And we may well look at this when we look back years from now as the moment when that became a driving force in media and took over from, say, laptop or handheld digital video.
Yeah, and I think this is what we have to keep an eye on in terms of media consumption habits. But I think Tobias is asking the right question though, in the sense of, how is reach going up or down? What's changing? What's not changing? And I think it really reminds us to kind of check our assumptions. And marketers, we always, while we always like to think that the same old thing that's worked will keep on working, we also like to keep saying everything's being disrupted. And changing always. And well, this is certainly a big disruption, and how we grapple with that is what we've been talking about for the last 45 minutes or so. But some of those fundamental assumptions about human behavior, at a really core level that Julie, you're alluding to before, I think is probably not going to change so rapidly. Where we get our news or our entertainment and so on is a moving target at the moment, but that's always been the case in one way or another. Maybe it's happening a bit faster. So I guess what we're also advising people is let's see what's happening, look at the evidence, look at the data, as opposed to sort of the intuition ruling the day, which marketers sometimes like to do. We're fast approaching the hour, which means we don't have much time left. So I want to do sort of one more sort of theme of questions, and then we'll go to final thoughts from our panel, because there's been quite a few questions really about how what we've been saying applies to smaller organizations, SMEs, entrepreneurial startups, and so on. So I'm just curious what the panelists would think in general about that, which I know is a very big question in and of itself, and it might be worth us having another episode on. But just at least at a high level, any thoughts about that? Julie, I'll come to you first.
Well, obviously, smaller businesses in this particular crisis are much more vulnerable and have fewer resources to help them through this. I would say the one thing that you can do, which doesn't take a lot of resource, is really pay attention to your consumers and your customers, and really and let them help you define how you're going to first live through this time of uncertainty, but then how would they like to see you redefine how you serve them into the future. They can be, they're the ones you're trying to serve. Find out what they want, and then try to deliver that, and figure out how to deliver it efficiently and effectively.
Martyn?
Yeah, I'm probably mindful that I'm not a great spokesperson for small businesses, but I would speak for the consumer of small businesses, and in San Diego here, I've just been amazed at the resilience of some of the small businesses and some of the creativity of. We've got. This sounds really quite trite and frivolous almost, but you can order a gallon of margarita mix now from certain areas, and it's forced some of the small businesses to do pickups, to do takeouts, to just think about different ways of acting with a consumer. And from a consumer perspective, we're feeding the hurt of those small businesses. And I can tell you, my family here, we spend a lot more money now today with those small businesses than perhaps we would have done with Whole Foods or some of the other big brand stores. And I think it would actually galvanize the consumer's view of small businesses throughout the recovery, because I think that their innovation and their scrappiness will be rewarded post-pandemic.
And Seth?
I think there's a great amount of warmth and encouragement for small businesses right now amongst consumers. And so there is an opportunity there to deepen that bond. I also think that not enough has been done to protect small businesses and That will be a debate that will go on for years from now as to whether or not enough has been done, or whether that's all been taken by larger corporations. But I think the human element, and that point of, to Julie's point, maybe a half hour ago, about earning credentials, the small and medium businesses are the ones that have already earned those credentials in many ways within their communities. And it would be great to see the marketing community help them to amplify that as well, right? We're seeing a lot of campaigns here in New York encouraging people, as I know Andrew, you and I have discussed, to buy gift cards for businesses, so that when they have cash flow now for when they reopen, you can use those gift cards. More and more innovation around marketing for that will help countries return, will help economies return. And we have an industry that is really blessed. As marketers, we really don't break a sweat. We don't have to lift anything. We don't have to break any rocks. We don't have to build any bridges. We use our minds to enable businesses and enable consumers to have the things that they want, or the things that they need. And I think there's an opportunity here as marketers for us to give back to those small businesses and really make an impact that will last and earn our own credentials and credibility with generations to come. I want Tobias, who was asking the question a little while ago, to want to be in journalism, to want to be in marketing, to want to be a part of the media, because we need our smartest, most talented people to want to be a part of what we all do. And if you ask anyone, this is a battle for talent. And we will earn that talent from the next generation by doing the right things right now.
All right. I want to just have final thoughts. So that's a wonderful final thought. But I did promise, and I know we have some thoughts. So I'll just go down the panel one more time with any sort of last thoughts for the last couple of minutes we've got, and then we'll close. Julie.
I would just say the most important thing you can do right now and for the near future, well, actually forever, is listen to your consumers. Don't listen to the news. Don't only focus on what's happening on social media, because social media doesn't represent your full consumer base. Listen to your consumers and think about why they're doing what they're doing and what's the value equation for why they've decided to do something differently. And that will give you the direction you need to figure out what you should do next.
Martyn.
Yeah, I would convey authenticity of your brand, compassion, social responsibility. And I'll just close my session with a quote from Winston Churchill, who says, "We shall not be judged by the criticisms of our opponents, but the consequences of our acts." And I think that stands true for brands today as well.
And Seth.
It's a moment for reckoning. It's a moment for reinvention. And I know which side of that I'd prefer.
All right. And thank you to all three of you, to Martyn, to Julie, to Seth, for joining us. Always appreciate spending some time with you talking about all of these issues. So thank you again for giving up some time today. And to all of you who have been joining us live or are watching it later on, thanks for being our audience. Like I said, we've been doing this now for a month, and we've got more exciting and interesting and practically useful episodes of Leadership in Extraordinary Times coming up, in the coming months. So thank you for being an audience. Thank you for your questions. As always, we can't get to every question, but I did try to group them into themes. And so, really, really appreciate that engagement with us today. And of course, hopefully you'll join us tomorrow for our special episode at special time at 3:00 British Summer Time with Speaker Al Gore, former US Vice President, and then at our usual times on Tuesday and Thursday, 2 p.m. British Summer Time next week for more conversation. So thank you. Stay well, stay healthy, be safe, and all the best from all of us here at Oxford Said.